Have you ever felt like your mind was a problem? Not because it was wrong, but because it saw too much. You did not say anything offensive. You did not act superior. You just existed. And somehow, that was enough to make people uncomfortable, dismissive, cold. The smarter you became, the more the world seemed to turn away. Not with hatred, but with subtle punishment, isolation, awkward silence, mockery disguised as jokes, opportunities that disappeared without reason. You thought it was you, that maybe you were too intense, too complicated, too serious. But it was not your personality, it was your perception. You saw through things, and that made people feel exposed, naked in the presence of someone who did not buy the illusion. Arthur Schopenhauer believed this was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. Society does not just ignore intelligence, it punishes it, not openly, not violently, but psychologically, by pushing the intelligent to the edge of belonging. Because the truth is, people don't want to be awakened, they want to be comforted. And when you challenge that comfort, you don't get a thank you. You get exile. The punishment does not come with chains. It does not arrive in shouts or slaps or laws. It comes in silence, in the glance that looks past you, the conversation that dies when you enter the room, the job you did not get, not because you were not qualified, but because you made the interviewer feel small. No one says it out loud, but you learn quickly. Thinking deeply comes with a price, and that price is social acceptance. You were not excluded because you were rude. You were excluded because you were rare. You asked questions that made people squirm. You noticed patterns they were not ready to see. You made jokes that were not about celebrities or gossip, and so they fell flat. Soon you were labeled too intense, too complicated, hard to talk to, but none of that was true. What was true was that your presence made them feel exposed. You were not just another person in the group. You were the mirror, and no one likes a mirror that shows what they are avoiding. This is the cost society never talks about. The hidden tax on awareness, the quiet exile of the thoughtful. It's not that the intelligent are hated, they are just inconvenient. They disrupt the script. They don't laugh when everyone else is laughing. They pause before answering. They question things that were supposed to be left unquestioned. And society does not punish that with violence. It punishes it with invisibility. You get passed over, left out, talked around, smiled at, but never really welcomed. At first you think something's wrong with you, that maybe you need to be more social, more lighthearted, more normal. But the more you try to shrink yourself to fit, the more lifeless you become. Because intelligence is not a personality flaw, it's a perception shift. And once you see the world differently, you can't unsee it. Even if it costs you the world you once belonged to. You have probably noticed it by now. You don't have to say anything controversial. You don't have to correct anyone. You don't even have to speak. Just being in the room, being fully present, fully aware, is enough to change the energy. People start fidgeting. They explain themselves when you did not ask. They laugh too loud, or they cut you off, or they look at their phones a little too often. You did not provoke them, you mirrored them, and that's what made them uncomfortable. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. It happens when someone's presence reflects back what others are trying to avoid in themselves. You became the subconscious threat, not because you attacked their beliefs, but because your existence questioned them, because your curiosity highlighted their complacency, your depth exposed their surface, your restraint revealed their insecurity. Most people are not ready for that kind of reflection. They don't want to see their intellectual laziness. They don't want to feel how little they've questioned their lives, so they label you instead. They say you're arrogant, cold, aloof, but what they are really saying is, you make me see something in myself that I would rather avoid. This is why even your silence is misread. You're not withdrawing, you're observing, but they interpret that as judgment because they can feel the difference. They know at some level that you see more than you let on, and nothing terrifies the average ego more than being seen clearly. The mirror you hold up does not flatter them. It does not lie. It does not play along. And so, they resent you for it. Not openly, not consciously, but deeply. And that resentment shows up in 1,000 subtle ways. In the friends who drift, in the coworkers who compete, in the family members who dismiss your thoughts with a smile and a shrug. You are not being punished for being wrong. You are being punished for seeing too clearly, for being what Schopenhauer called a heightened consciousness in a sleeping world. And the more awake you are, the more your very presence becomes a challenge. Not because you said anything, but because the mirror you carry is impossible to ignore. You were born into a system that was not designed for truth. It was designed for survival. And for most of human history, survival did not depend on being the smartest. It depended on being accepted by the tribe. Thousands of years ago, being exiled from your group meant death. No food, no shelter, no safety. So, the brain evolved a priority system, belonging first, truth later, if at all. This wiring still runs your biology. Even today in modern cities with grocery stores and door locks, your brain still treats rejection like a life-threatening event. That's why people fear intellectuals. Not because they hate intelligence, but because intelligence threatens social cohesion. It disrupts the unspoken agreements that hold the group together. It introduces questions where there were once shared beliefs. And for the tribal brain, that kind of disruption feels like danger. When you bring up something too deep, too real, too far outside the script, it doesn't matter if you're right. It matters if you fracture the harmony. And in tribal logic, the one who causes discomfort becomes the threat, even if that discomfort is just a new idea. This is why society has a built-in rejection mechanism for anyone who thinks differently. It's not about facts. It's about the fear center of the brain, the amygdala. When people feel intellectually outmatched, their amygdala lights up the same way it would if they were being physically threatened. This is primal biology. Your intelligence didn't just confuse them. It activated their survival response. They felt exposed, so they pulled away. They felt inferior, so they found reasons to dislike you. Not because of who you are, but because of what you triggered in them. You didn't break the tribe's rules. You revealed that the rules were built on illusions, and nothing threatens a group more than someone who sees past its myths. That's why deep thinkers have always lived on the edges of society. Not because they're antisocial, but because their minds are incompatible with the primitive politics of belonging. Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He believed that the more one sees, the harder it becomes to participate in the game. Not out of pride, but because awareness is alienation, and the individual mind, no matter how sharp, is still punished by the tribal brain for being too awake. If you have ever felt like the system was not made for you, you are right, it was not. Because our institutions are not built to nurture intelligence, they are built to control it, to redirect it, to filter it through systems of power, profit, and predictability. Let's start with school. You're told it's a place for learning, but what does it really teach? Memorize, repeat. Don't question, don't disrupt. Don't think too far outside the box, because that box has already been filled with a curriculum designed decades ago by people who never knew your mind. The students who ask why too often are labeled as rebellious. The ones who challenge the textbook are told to focus on what will be on the test. And just like that, your natural intelligence, your hunger to explore and connect dots, gets labeled as a distraction. You're told to quiet it down, to color inside the lines, to become employable, not enlightened, because schools don't reward depth, they reward obedience. Then you enter the workplace, and it gets worse. You imagine that innovation will be welcomed, that your insight will be valued, but the moment you start to question how things are done, you're seen as a threat to culture. The employee who plays the game, nods in meetings, and avoids tough conversations, they get promoted. Meanwhile, you, the one who sees inefficiency, who proposes better systems, who refuses to blindly agree, you're told to soften your approach, to read the room, to be more flexible. Not because you're wrong, but because you make the comfortable uncomfortable. In most companies, conformity is safer than brilliance, and those who rise to the top aren't the most insightful. They're the most agreeable. And then there's politics, where charisma is king, where speaking simply, loudly, and with absolute certainty wins more followers than speaking truthfully. The politician who speaks with nuance, who explores uncomfortable truths, who admits the complexity of real problems, is seen as weak, indecisive, or too intellectual. Meanwhile, the one who smiles, repeats slogans, and tells people what they want to hear, gets elected. Because the system doesn't reward intelligence, it rewards emotional comfort. You're allowed to be smart, as long as your intelligence serves the script, as long as you keep your truths marketable, digestible, safe. But the moment your thoughts threaten the status quo, the moment your depth reveals the cracks, you're labeled as difficult, as dangerous, as not a team player. And so, intelligence gets reshaped into productivity. Creativity gets crushed into compliance. Insight is filtered until it's nothing more than content. Schopenhauer warned that institutions aren't designed for truth. They're designed for survival. And survival means maintaining the illusion that everything is under control. So, when your intelligence threatens that illusion, you become a liability. And society punishes liabilities. Not with violence, but with red tape, with rejection, with silence, with slow starvation of the soul until you either conform or disappear. Arthur Schopenhauer saw something in the human condition that most thinkers were too afraid to say out loud. Intelligence isn't a gift, it's a burden, not because it fails to succeed in the world, but because it sees the world too clearly to enjoy it. At the center of Schopenhauer's philosophy is a concept called the will. Not willpower, not conscious desire, but a blind, irrational force that drives all life forward, without logic, without morality, without care for truth. To Schopenhauer, the average person is moved by this will to live, a primitive hunger for pleasure, comfort, status, and survival. It fuels ambition, it fuels reproduction, it fuels the need to chase, to climb, to consume. And this will is so powerful that most people never stop to question it. They marry without reflection, work without purpose, chase goals they never chose, for rewards they can't define. But the intelligent, they are different. Not because they are more virtuous, but because they are cursed with the will to truth. This is what sets deep thinkers apart. They do not just live, they examine, they question. They observe the world like an outsider trapped inside it. They ask, why do we suffer? Why do we pretend? Why do we worship illusions and destroy what's real? And with each answer, they become more aware, more awake, and more alone. Because to wake up from the dream is to realize how many others are still sleeping, and how deeply they resent being disturbed. This is the curse. The will to truth doesn't bring peace. It brings pain. It strips away the comforts that others live by. It reveals the emptiness behind tradition, the cruelty behind culture, the absurdity behind ambition. Most people seek to be soothed, the intelligent seek to understand. And that difference creates a wall between them. The will to live says, hide from what hurts. The will to truth says, look, even if it breaks you. Schopenhauer believed that the more intelligent a person becomes, the more they suffer. Because they see through too much. They feel the weight of existence more heavily. They can no longer find meaning in what once felt fulfilling. Parties feel empty. Small talk becomes unbearable. Success feels hollow. What brings others joy brings the thinker discomfort, because they see the strings behind the puppet show. This is why society punishes the intelligent. Not because they are dangerous with weapons or wealth, but because they threaten the illusion that keeps everyone sane. Their very presence whispers, there's more than this. There's something wrong. There's something fake. And those whispers are unbearable in a world addicted to comfort. So, the will to truth isolates you. It pushes you to the edge. It strips away your ability to play pretend. And in that exile, you are left with only one choice. Do you numb yourself back into the dream? Or do you keep walking, knowing that truth will cost you everything the world calls happiness? Schopenhauer's answer was clear. Let the world sleep. Let them worship their illusions. But you must see, even if it breaks you. Because the only life worth living is the one not built on lies. Maybe you have spent years wondering what's wrong with you, why you struggle to connect, why conversations feel forced, why you feel like an outsider even when you try to belong. You have been told you are too serious, too intense, too sensitive, too much. But here's the truth. You're not broken. You're just seeing things ahead of their time. You're not difficult. You're advanced. Your intelligence didn't isolate you. It revealed you. It stripped away the illusions that others still cling to. And once you saw what was beneath the surface, you couldn't go back to pretending it wasn't there. That's why you struggle in shallow spaces. That's why small talk drains you. That's why you'd rather be alone than surrounded by noise. Because your mind is built to explore depth, and the world is addicted to distraction. You feel disconnected not because you lack something, but because you see too much. And in a society that thrives on comfort, clarity becomes a curse. But this curse isn't yours alone. History is filled with minds that were too far ahead to be embraced in their time. Socrates was executed for asking too many questions. He challenged Athens to think, and they punished him for it. Nikola Tesla dreamed of a future the world couldn't yet comprehend. He died poor, isolated, and unrecognized, while others built empires on his stolen ideas. Alan Turing cracked the code that helped end World War II. And yet, society destroyed him because he didn't fit into their definition of acceptable. Hypatia, a woman philosopher in ancient Rome, was murdered by a mob for teaching rational thought. Because her brilliance threatened religious power, they weren't celebrated, they were silenced. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right too soon. And maybe, so are you. The loneliness you feel isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of perception. You weren't born into the wrong world. You were born into a sleeping one, with eyes wide open. You were never too much. You were just advanced. And being ahead of your time doesn't make you broken. It makes you necessary. Because every age needs minds that don't just reflect it, but challenge it, disturb it, awaken it. And while society may not celebrate you now, that doesn't mean you're not shaping it. It means you're building something that won't be understood until the world finally catches up. It does not happen all at once. The punishment of intelligence is slow, quiet, almost invisible. It begins with being misunderstood, not once, but repeatedly. You say something layered, and they reduce it to a joke. You express concern, and they call you negative. You share an insight, and they change the subject. And eventually, you stop sharing. You shrink your words. You censor your thoughts. You smile when you're bored. You laugh at what doesn't move you. Not because you want to fit in, but because you're tired of standing out and getting nothing but silence in return. This is how it starts, with one quiet moment of being unseen, then another, and another, until you begin to wonder, maybe it's me. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I should say less, think less, be less. That's the cruelest part of this kind of punishment. It doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from a mirror warped by repetition. When the world responds to your depth with dismissal, you begin to question the depth itself. You begin to doubt what once felt like clarity. You begin to believe that silence means insignificance. But it doesn't. The silence is not a judgment of your value. It's a measurement of the room's depth. And sometimes, you're just in shallow rooms. Schopenhauer understood this kind of isolation. He saw how society conditions people to fear what makes them think and embrace what helps them forget. He knew that the more you see, the harder it is to feel seen. Because intelligence isn't just knowledge, it's awareness. It's sensitivity to contradiction, to falsehood, to the weight of things unsaid. And that awareness can feel like a curse when you're surrounded by those who have no desire to notice what you can't ignore. It creates a fatigue, not of the body, but of the soul. A weariness from conversations that never go deeper than the weather. A loneliness that persists even in a crowd. A quiet grief for connections that never quite happen. But you are not alone in this loneliness. You are not weak for feeling the weight of silence. You are not lost because you struggle to be understood. You are feeling the emotional toll of a mind that sees in a world that turns its head. And while that toll is real, so is what it means. That your pain isn't proof of failure, it's proof of perception. Society does not hate intelligence. It fears it until it's too late to be threatened by it. This is the great irony Schopenhauer understood. Genius is punished in life and praised in death. While you breathe, your thoughts are dangerous. Your questions are disruptive. Your clarity is a problem. But once you're gone, once your voice can no longer challenge the system, you become a legend. A quote, a safe piece of history stripped of its original danger. Galileo was silenced and imprisoned for challenging the church with scientific truth. Now, his name is celebrated in textbooks. Nietzsche was dismissed as insane. His ideas too dark, too radical, too unpalatable. Today, his philosophy shapes psychology, literature, and ethics. Van Gogh died broken alone. a madman with paintings no one wanted. Now those same works are worth hundreds of millions. Hypatia, one of the greatest minds of ancient Alexandria, was torn apart by a religious mob, not for any crime, but for the sin of being too intelligent, too independent, and a woman unafraid to think. What do they all have in common? Their intelligence became safe only after it stopped being active, only after the world no longer had to deal with the disruption they caused while alive. Because genius in the present is inconvenient. It forces reflection. It demands evolution. And people don't want that. Not until time dulls the edge and makes the truth feel distant. Less like a threat and more like a story. That's why society romanticizes intelligence after it's no longer dangerous. When it can't expose anyone. When it can't hold up a mirror. When it becomes a statue, not a spark. And that's the tragedy. Most of the minds that shape humanity are only embraced when they're no longer alive to feel it. So, if you've ever wondered why your insight is ignored, why your truth is too much, why your voice feels invisible, remember, you may not be misunderstood because you're wrong. You may be misunderstood because you're early. You were never the problem. You were the signal, the interruption, the mind that did not play along. And for that, they did not understand you. Not because you lacked clarity, but because you brought too much of it, too soon, too raw, too real. You were punished not because you were broken, but because you broke their illusion. You did not fit in because you could not shrink your vision to match the size of their comfort zone. They wanted silence. You brought reflection. They wanted agreement. You brought questions. They wanted smooth surfaces. You handed them a mirror, so they called you difficult, cold, detached, arrogant, but they were not describing you. They were describing their reaction to you, their fear of being seen, their discomfort with being asked to think, their instinct to reject what does not validate them. And in that reaction, you learned something painful, but essential. You were never just rejected. You were revealed. You did not lose people. You lost masks. You did not get left behind. You simply stepped ahead. Because intelligence is not neutral. It doesn't sit quietly. It shifts energy. It challenges hierarchy. It pierces through polite lies and names what others refuse to see. That's why the punishment comes. Not from malice, but from fear. And when you understand that, when you stop seeing their rejection as proof of your failure, you begin to reclaim your power. You start to see the silence differently. Not as an absence of connection, but as a boundary your mind naturally creates in a world that's not ready. But readiness doesn't matter, because your voice was never meant to make people comfortable. It was meant to wake them, to disrupt, to cut through the noise with something real. So, don't soften yourself. Don't dim your clarity to fit into rooms built for shadows. You were not made for easy acceptance. You were made for truth. And truth by its nature is rarely welcome until it's needed. So walk forward, not with bitterness, but with understanding. You are not the outcast. You are the outlier, the mirror, the threat society pretends not to need, until everything collapses. And when that time comes, don't say, "I told you so." Just keep thinking, keep seeing, keep being exactly what you are, because what they call punishment was always proof of your power.